Thank you, Maddie. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I intend to this to be a rather informal conversation. At any point along the way, if you have questions, please stop me. You can speak up and ask questions, or you could send them through the chat, however you prefer. But I just want to make sure that we're addressing your questions along the way. And if not, we'll have a question and answer session at the end of this episode. We should only be here about 45 minutes. Today's portion is not overly technical. It's really meant for shops and technicians that are considering getting into ADAS and trying to make you aware of what some of the realities are. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see if I could find my presentation. And I am going to, let's see here, kill my camera so you can concentrate on what I'm showing. So like I said, this is not going to be overly technical. It's really, again, about that thought process and decision-making process for shops that have not yet gotten into adding ADAS calibration to their business. So as Maddie mentioned, this is part one of a 7-part series. And this is all about, is ADAS calibration right for your shop? I do want to let you know that not only is this not technical, this is not a sales pitch. It's also not a scare tactic. I'm going to try to give you as much honest and open information as possible about the realities of performing ADAS calibrations in your shop, so you can make the right decision for your business as to, do you want to get into ADAS calibrations now or at some point in the future? And if so, how do you want to go about that? And that last part of the question will make more sense as we get into this information a little bit more in depth. So as you can see here in this image, not everyone has a shop that looks like this. Not everyone has tons of free space for doing ADAS calibrations. So again, we're going to talk about the realities and what it's really going to take to get you into this business should you choose to go down that path. But first, let's start and mention what is ADAS calibration, or what is ADAS. So ADAS stands for Advanced Driver Assistance Systems, and these systems are intended to help the driver pilot the vehicle, make driving more comfortable, making the vehicle more safe, thereby reducing the number and the severity of collisions. So the ADAS systems that we have today in vehicles are really the test bed or the stepping stones to fully autonomous vehicles. The vehicle manufacturers are testing out the hardware and testing out the software and ensuring that things work, and they're making systems more and more robust, making more and more systems work together in the hopes of, in the near future, rolling out fully autonomous vehicles. There are a lot of hurdles between today and the rollout of truly fully autonomous vehicles. And it's really not about the vehicle technology or the hardware or the software. It's really about infrastructure, roads, road markings being consistent from town to town, city to city, state to state. It's critical that ADAS systems, especially the forward-facing cameras used for things like lane departure warning, can see lane lines clearly. If they can't, then the systems can't properly function. So we've got a lot of work to do in infrastructure. You can think about how much money would have to be sunk into redoing roads, repainting roads, and just making sure things are consistent, from border to border. It's going to take some time before we see those fully autonomous vehicles. And what I mean by fully autonomous, the vehicles that don't have a steering wheel, a gas pedal, or a brake pedal, where you get in, just like the futuristic movies that we see, and you tell the car where you want to go, and it does it with no driver intervention. Excuse me. The vehicles that we have today are considered level 2 autonomous vehicles. They still require a driver behind the wheel to be in complete control of the vehicle at all times. Now, I know we've seen a lot of videos on YouTube and things like that, where we see someone either playing video games, watching a movie, or sleeping behind the wheel of their Tesla as the car goes about its business. Well, Unfortunately, with level 2 autonomy, that is not the way vehicles are supposed to be used. Even with level 3 autonomous vehicles, which are not yet legal in the United States, they still require a driver behind the wheel paying full attention to the road and to traffic. In case something goes wrong, they still need to take over. Now, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says that what we have today as ADAS systems are not truly safety systems. Now, I know all the vehicle OEMs and insurance companies and everyone else, all the magazine articles, all talk about these critical safety systems. Well, NHTSA believes that they're not actually safety systems because what we have today as advanced driver assistance systems can be turned off. And because of that, they can't be deemed a true safety system. And it's going to be a while before NHTSA actually determines that these systems will be truly mandated safety systems. You'll see some information we'll talk about in just a little bit about how the proliferation of ADAS in vehicles is going to increase over the next 2 or 3 years. And I know there's been some discussion about government mandates in the year model year 2023. But the fact of the matter is these systems are not yet being mandated. So they are assistance systems, and drivers need to address them as such. Now, ADAS, as we see it today, is not new. So many shops and technicians think that this is brand new technology that just came out in the past couple of years. As you see from the slide here, ADAS first hit the road in the United States in 1999, 21 years ago, actually going on 22 years ago if you look at vehicle model years. Taking a look at the slide, in 1999, Mercedes-Benz released a radar-based adaptive cruise control system that they called Distronic. And then shortly thereafter, Cadillac came out with their night vision system. Toyota had a laser-based cruise control, which they quickly followed up with a radar-based cruise control system. And then several manufacturers came out with their own versions of lane departure warning. What really made these early systems different is, well, first, many of them did require calibration. And I don't know about you, but I don't recall performing ADAS calibrations in the early 2000s on any of these vehicles. It wasn't driven heavily by service information. You didn't hear talk about it in trade magazines, trade publications. And what really made these systems different was every single one of the ones that you see on the screen here were added cost options and only available on very high-end luxury vehicles. So not only were there a select few vehicles, it was an added cost option that many people chose not to spend the extra money because they weren't aware of the technology and how it could interact with them on the road. Today, so many vehicles are equipped with ADAS, and even the most based vehicles like a Toyota Yaris is coming standard with multiple ADAS capabilities. So besides the fact that there are more vehicles with ADAS and more ADAS systems, it's just there are so many more possibilities for performing calibrations today than there were before, that this is driving a ton of interest in the automotive aftermarket, especially in the glass installation and collision industries. And that's because those two industries are faced with working on ADAS systems on a daily basis. It's part of their regular operating procedure. However, there are other aspects of auto repair that are directly impacted by the need for ADAS calibration, and they just really haven't been commonly addressed until recently. Another reason that there's a lot of attention being given to ADAS calibrations today is that four-letter word, liability. Lawyers. We tend to live in a very litigious society here in the United States, and because of the potential for not only vehicular but bodily injury if one of these critical systems malfunctions, there is a potential for liability. There are actually law firms today that do nothing but ADAS litigation. Now, let that sink in for a minute. Can you imagine opening up a law firm just for ADAS litigation? I happened to see a billboard when I was in Dallas, Texas, stating just that, the Todd Tracy law firm. They're experts in ADAS litigation. There's another one in Chicago. So it's really getting kind of crazy, the focus that so many people are putting on ADAS and ADAS calibrations. But the reality of the matter is, when it comes to liability, the liability on ADAS is really no different than for any other service or repair that we've performed for the past several decades. Every time we do a brake job or a water pump or a four-wheel alignment, we carry along some level of liability should something go wrong. We put on a set of tires and something goes wrong. You do an oil change and don't tighten the filter or the drain plug and it causes an accident. It carries liability. It's just there's been a lot of focus and attention in the aftermarket, especially the trade publications, that has really driven the interest in ADAS and ADAS calibrations. So if we take a look at the ADAS calibration market potential, this is a kind of an interesting survey that I found in a trade publication. This was done in late 2019, and this was a survey of the general automotive aftermarket. So not focused on collision or glass, but the general auto repair aftermarket. It was done by SEMA, and they asked repair shops, how many vehicles are you repairing in any given week that require a calibration because of the repairs or the services you performed? And here's the way these questions were answered. Shops said 5 to 10, 9% of shops responding said 5 to 10 cars per week that they service required an ADAS calibration, one or more calibrations because of the services being performed. Another 9% said 4 to 5 vehicles, 11% said 1 to 3, and 17% said less than 1 car a week. But here's the one that really got me. 54% of the shops responding said they don't work on ADAS equipped vehicles. So think about that. They don't work on ADAS equipped vehicles. Is that the fact, or is it they're completely and totally unaware of the ADAS systems on the vehicles that are coming into their service bays on a daily basis? I personally had some experience when I started with Autel 2 years ago. I visited a couple of dealerships. I visited some aftermarket repair shops and especially body shops in the Raleigh area, because before I accepted this position to run the ADAS program for Autel, I wanted to know what shops were doing about ADAS. So walking into a new car dealership, I asked the service manager, what are you doing for ADAS calibrations and how many are you doing on a weekly basis? And this happened to be a Toyota dealership. They told me, those systems don't need to be calibrated. A Toyota dealership told me their systems don't need to be calibrated, or their service information states otherwise. Went into a very large collision repair shop chain, and I asked the service manager the same thing. Now, this is someone I happen to know. It's a shop not too far from my house. And I asked him the same thing, and he says, oh, we really don't see vehicles with that, with those new systems. And where we were standing in the shop, just doing a scan, I was able to see at least 10 vehicles that were ADAS equipped. And I had to point it out to the shop manager that these vehicles are equipped with ADAS, and after you're doing collision repairs, calibrations are required. It really opened his eyes, and we started discussing liability, and that really opened his mouth. He got a little concerned after that. Next, you have to determine if there are enough vehicles in your market equipped with ADAS to help you drive a successful ADAS calibration business. So depending on what business you're in, general repair, if you're in alignment and tire shop, if you're in the collision industry, you have to look at your business to see the vehicles that you're servicing today. Let's say if you reviewed the records in your shop information system and pulled up the vehicles over the past 8 to 12 months, and searched for certain year, make, and model of vehicles that could be equipped with ADAS, just to see of your customer base, how many ADAS equipped vehicles are there? And then once you get into ADAS, how likely is it that you could drive additional business to your service bays because of your newfound capability of performing ADAS calibrations? So looking at vehicle registrations, this is as of the end of 2019, there are 284.5 million vehicles registered in the United States. Now, of those, 80%, or roughly 227.5 million, are passenger cars and light trucks, the vehicles that we work on a daily basis. Now, of that 80%, 27%, or 61.5 million vehicles, are currently equipped with one or more ADAS feature. So that's quite a big vehicle pool, but the question is, how many of these vehicles are in your market that you can actually draw from to be profitable in the ADAS calibration business? Because I'm going to be very honest with you, it is not an inexpensive prospect to add full-featured ADAS calibration to your business. It can be quite expensive. Now, there's ways that you could get into ADAS inexpensively. Hold on one second. There are ways that you can get into ADAS inexpensively, but that would limit your potential for how many calibrations you could actually perform. Now, there's another study or survey that was done of vehicle OEMs, and looking at the percentage of vehicles that were equipped with just automatic emergency braking or forward collision warning. And where this is going is it's illustrating how the number of ADAS equipped vehicles has increased since 2016 going into the very near future. So in 2016, only 9% of vehicles had either automatic emergency braking or forward collision warning. And these numbers start to increase pretty significantly year after year. Now, these are vehicle model years. So as we get into 2019, 66%, and then 2020 model year, 84% of vehicles, new vehicles sold in the United States, were equipped with at least forward collision warning or automatic emergency braking. And this is going to expand to 100% for model year 2023. And this is due to not a government mandate, but an agreement of the 19 largest automobile manufacturers that they have gotten together, formed a coalition, and agreed that as of the end of 2022, all new vehicles sold into the United States will be equipped with at least automatic emergency braking and forward collision warning. Now, the reason that vehicle manufacturers or the government are not mandating any one of these systems is because of the time it takes to create legislation, that by the time that legislation was created, the systems on the road would already be outdated. Just look at what happened with the mandate of backup cameras that were supposed to be implemented in 2008 and ended up not being fully rolled out until many years afterward. Well, NHTSA and the Department of Transportation fully admitted that if they even attempted to mandate anything, it would be at least 10 years out. And by then, the systems would be so different, so vastly different, that the mandate would be nearly meaningless. So working with the vehicle manufacturers, they formed this coalition to voluntarily increase the number of systems that are on new vehicles. So what's really important here to understand is ADAS calibration and ADAS systems are not a fad. It is not going away. It is only going to get bigger and bigger. And we're going to talk about the different types of calibration and where the OEMs are heading in the near future. So here's one. If we look at 2020 model year vehicles, This is going to cover the different ADAS technologies that were available in the vehicles sold into the United States model year 2020. The reason I'm bringing this up is this may help you decide what types of calibrations you may want to perform in your shop, because not everyone gets into performing calibrations on all available systems because of the possibility of increased cost with having all the different calibration fixtures and targets and accessories and scan tools and things. It's quite extensive, the number of different targets that are available today. But in 2020 model year, 59% of the vehicles sold into the US had automatic emergency braking. Another 50% had automatic cruise control. Pedestrian detection was on 48% of vehicles. Some form of lane departure warning was on 40% of vehicles. Forward collision warning on another 38%. Around view monitoring or surround view was on 38%. And then 15% had night vision. So you could see night vision isn't the most common system on vehicles today, but it is gaining popularity very, very quickly. Just 2 years ago, only about 2.5% of vehicles were equipped with night vision. And here it's risen to 15% this year. Now, this was a collision industry study, and this was done in conjunction with insurance companies for the number of calibrations that were performed in the collision industry, separated by glass or forward-facing camera windshield calibrations versus radar calibrations. Now, one of the things that's important to understand here is most of the collision centers that responded to this survey used a third party to perform their windshield calibrations. And those calibrations were not counted in this survey because the collision shop was not directly billing the insurance company for that calibration. So in 2018, only 300,000 calibrations were billed through insurance companies in the collision industry. 2019, that jumped to 1.1 million. 2020, it was forecasted to be right about 2 million. I will let you know that it has already exceeded this forecast, and they're at about the 2.5 million calibration point this year. And in 2023, it's looking to exceed 5.5 million calibrations. Now, this survey was based on shops that were performing calibrations. So there's a large number of shops that aren't performing calibrations that information wasn't able to be gathered. But other surveys found that in the United States, less than 40% of calibrations required after collision repair are actually being performed. That means more than 60% of the vehicles that need to be calibrated are being sent back to the customers, put out on the road, not properly calibrated. A real startling survey was done in Canada. And in Canada, same basic information with collision shops, less than 18% of calibrations that are required after collision repair are actually being performed. Kind of scary. Now, this was a business survey that was performed about the calibration market growth rate, looking at 2019 and over the next 10 years. And it was determined that in the general repair industry, it would be showing the greatest growth in calibrations being performed by a general repair shop with a year-over-year growth rate of over 12%. That's some pretty astronomical growth. You'll see that collision and windshield replacement industries have a lower growth. That's only because they've been in this market for so long. They've already been doing a lot of calibrations. Now, when you look at the graph doesn't actually indicate that the number of calibrations are going to decrease. It's just that the growth rate is decreasing. So as more and more shops get into the calibration business, there is still growth, but it's at a lower level than it is today. Now let's talk about the types of calibrations. I made a statement early on that it's possible to get into the calibration business at a lower cost, with the exception that you might be limiting the potential of the number of calibrations that you might be able to perform. So there's really two forms of calibration. There's dynamic calibrations, which are performed with a scan tool and driving the vehicle. So you plug the scan tool into the vehicle, you initiate the calibration, take the vehicle out and drive it under the very specific driving conditions dictated by the OEM. Now, some of these driving conditions might be good weather conditions, must be done during the day, can't be done in foggy conditions, must have clear visible lane markings, objects on the side of the road like garbage cans, mailboxes, pedestrians, fire hydrants, things for a camera to be able to detect. Vehicle must be driven at a certain speed range, above 32, but maybe below 67 miles an hour. Minimal lane changes. Can't be driven in heavy traffic. General Motors on some of their vehicles wants 10 car lengths between you and the car in front of you in order to calibrate properly. That can make things a little difficult to actually perform calibrations, especially in a busy area like Raleigh or Durham. Which is one of the reasons why OEMs are finding dynamic calibrations to be so difficult. OEM dealerships in busy metropolitan areas are having great difficulty performing calibrations, successfully, I should add, because of the high level of traffic. Northern states, just think about the storm that's going to hit the Northeast tonight. Northern states, when there's snow on the ground, dynamic calibrations can't be performed. If the camera can't see lane markings, the calibration can't be completed. And especially a dealership, or any repair shop, you can't return an uncalibrated vehicle back to a consumer and just tell them, just drive it and bring it back to me in March when the snow is melted. The possibility for liability is just much too great. So dynamic calibrations, again, performed with a scan tool. And then there's static calibrations. Static calibrations, again, use a scan tool, but they're performed in your service bay under very controlled circumstances, controlled environment, bright, even controlled lighting, no windows, uncontrolled lights, no background clutter, flat level floor, have to have the specific targets and patterns and calibration accessories for the vehicle that you're calibrating. And you have to have all those calibration procedures that you would find in your service information system, along with the specifications for the distance that targets need to be placed from a vehicle, target height, target spacing, things like that. Then there are some vehicles that are actually a dual calibration. You perform a static calibration and then you perform a follow-up dynamic. And vehicle manufacturers that offer dual calibrations are Honda, Subaru, many Hyundai Kia vehicles, and some Mercedes-Benz vehicles. Now, they're all a little bit different on how they go about performing these calibrations. Honda says that after a static calibration, you have 30 minutes to go out and complete the dynamic. And if it doesn't pass, you have to start over with the static calibration again. Mercedes is very similar. You perform a static and you have 30 seconds to initiate the dynamic and go out and drive it. And it could take easily 45 minutes to complete the dynamic calibration because they have very, very strict driving conditions. And Hyundai Kia, this is actually a matter of confusion for a lot of shops because Hyundai Kia doesn't necessarily call it a dynamic calibration. They call it a test drive. And so most people would think, okay, I do a calibration and I'm going to go out and test drive it to see how it works. But that's not what Hyundai Kia is talking about, because in their test drive, they tell you what the conditions for driving the vehicle are. So that's a key tip-off. Anytime you see on your scan tool or in service information, very specific driving conditions, that indicates that it is in fact a dynamic calibration. And after that dynamic is performed and completed successfully, then you do a test drive to ensure that the systems operate. The whole point of this is these different types of calibrations require different levels of effort and have to be charged at different levels because of those levels of effort. So when you get into a vehicle that is a dual calibration, it is in fact two calibrations and should be charged as such. And keeping in mind that on any vehicle that's ADAS equipped, it's always a good idea. We highly recommend performing a pre-scan before any repairs are performed and a post-scan after the calibration is completed and the road test is done. Really just to, the pre-scan is there to help you determine any pre-existing conditions and to cover your shop from the customers that say, ever since you worked on my car, this didn't work, or the check engine light is on. Well, you now would have proof that certain fault codes were present, or taking photographs and videos of the vehicle ahead of time, documenting any kind of pre-existing damage. The post scan is there to help you determine and verify for your customers that you have in fact completed the calibrations properly, and the two reports together are useful for you in the future if there is ever any issue with potential liability. Documentation is your key to saving your shop from liability issues, proving that you've done things correctly and documenting all the steps. I don't want to get too in depth into that. That's another one of our future sessions. But as far as the market trends and where the OEMs are taking calibrations, currently, as of model years 2009 to model year 2020, 56% of vehicles are statically calibrated, 37% are dynamic. There is that 5% that are dual calibration, and there's another 2% that actually give you a choice, static or dynamic. And generally, Mazda is famous for either or calibrations, and even they admit they prefer static because it's more accurate, but they understand that if you don't have the capability and you don't meet the shop requirements to perform a static calibration, the dynamic calibration is acceptable. So with that, I'm going to move into the next section of the presentation, which is going to talk more about the ADAS calibrations and the requirements for your shop. So this is where you'll have to determine if your shop would actually meet the requirements necessary to perform ADAS calibrations. And the reason that I believe that this part is so important is, in keeping in mind, I'm in the ADAS calibration sales business. So again, I'm not trying to scare anybody away, but I'm also not throwing a sales pitch. Just that I've had a number of customers purchase equipment, expensive equipment, only to find that they don't have the space in their shop. Their bays don't meet the requirements for performing calibrations, and it would be very expensive for them to do shop modifications, and they end up being unhappy with their purchase. And I wouldn't want that to happen to any of you. So I'm just trying to open your eyes to the reality. I know a lot of shops, even here in the Triangle, that have gotten into ADAS calibrations, knowing full well that their current location, their current building doesn't meet the requirements, but they've done things like build a separate building, or rent a building across town to do calibrations, share calibration equipment with another shop. There's all different ways that you can make this work. It's all a matter of getting creative. So the ADAS technologies that we're going to be dealing with surround the entire vehicle. There's a huge number of different ADAS technologies: lane departure warning and adaptive cruise control, around view monitoring, surround view, 360 view. It has a bunch of different names. Cross traffic warning, parking assist, rear collision warning, blind spot detection, pedestrian detection, traffic sign recognition, collision avoidance, automatic emergency braking, and the list goes on and on and on. So all of these systems require some form of calibration in order for them to operate properly. But generally speaking, when we're performing calibrations, we're not directly calibrating any one of these systems. What we're doing is we are interacting or calibrating the sensors that make these systems possible. Now, what I find really interesting about ADAS technology, the systems that you see on vehicles today, is all of the systems shown on the screen and more are really nothing but software. These software packages written by engineers utilize one or more sensors or cameras in order to make these systems function. Well, the software engineers at the OEM level can actually write more and more advanced software to make existing technology work in new ways. And here's what I mean by that. So looking at this image here, we've got this Volkswagen sitting in the middle of our screen that has adaptive cruise control, automatic emergency braking, and collision avoidance. And all three of those systems are operated by a single radar sensor mounted in the grille. I'm sorry, hang on. My mouse is giving me problems, I apologize. So the single long-range radar sensor mounted in the grille has different software packages to allow the vehicle to be equipped with multiple ADAS functions that are all based on a single component, or maybe a combination of components. And what I mean by that is most of the critical ADAS systems that we see today, the systems like lane departure warning and adaptive cruise control, automatic emergency braking, they're not operated through a single component. The OEMs utilize sensors in conjunction. It's called sensor fusion. They'll use a camera in the windshield with a radar in the grille to make a much more advanced ADAS system. With the camera being able to see, like we do, it can detect and classify objects. It can see an object and it can tell the system in the vehicle that that object is a car or a motorcycle or a pedestrian. Where a radar sensor can detect an object, but it can't tell the system what that object is. It can tell it how fast it's moving, how far it is from the vehicle, things like that. So working together, a radar sensor and a camera can actually provide more information for more advanced ADAS functionality. So a camera that can see and classify an object working with a radar sensor that can detect an object, the software can actually pick things out that one component might not be able to see on its own. I hope that made sense. What I'm getting at here is because these systems and sensors work together, it is important at times that to understand that you perform a service or repair on a vehicle, you may need to do more than one ADAS calibration. So when we're looking at things like all the different sensors that we're going to interact with and the sensors that need to be calibrated, performing a service as simple as a wheel alignment where we have adjusted thrust angle may require both a forward-facing camera calibration along with a forward-facing or long-range radar calibration, because those two sensors work in conjunction and are aimed to the same point 200, 300, 400 meters down the road. So when you start thinking about how these systems function, it actually opens up much more potential for profitability in performing ADAS calibrations, but also the potential for issues with customers, because now a simple wheel alignment is no longer simple, because a simple wheel alignment at whatever you're charging, $129 for an alignment, now carries with it two ADAS calibrations that might be $300 a piece. That alignment got very, very expensive. And it's not really a good idea to allow a customer to take a vehicle after performing an alignment when they say that they don't want the calibrations, because when it comes down to it, in a court of law, you're the professional. And a judge and a jury, and sometimes the executioner, are going to say, you being the professional, you should know better that if you're doing the work, you must also do the calibrations, and it goes hand in hand. If a consumer doesn't want the calibration, unfortunately, we may have to look at turning away the work. But on the other hand, the better course of option is educating your customers as to what ADAS is and why it's important and why certain services and repairs will drive the need for calibrations to make these systems function. Now, one area that's become problematic is a lot of consumers don't even know that they have ADAS systems on their vehicles, which sounds crazy, I know, but when vehicles are purchased new or used, they're not being trained on how to operate the systems on the vehicle. And more often than not, the vehicles are delivered with the systems turned off, and the consumer, the driver, may not ever know that these systems exist until you perform a service, you perform a calibration, and then you leave the system on afterwards. And then the customer comes back complaining that their vehicle is now possessed after you did a wheel alignment, and now the vehicle's trying to steer all by itself. So consumer education is really critical, and we have a segment of one of our future modules that we're going to be getting into some resources that are readily available for you in your shop to help educate your customers. And it's something that's available at no charge. So you can actually start educating your customers right away, not wait until you have calibration equipment. Start educating now, and then when you're ready to calibrate, that will pay benefits. So why is calibration even necessary? Well, we started talking about it a little bit, but I just want to give you this example. We're driving this blue vehicle that's equipped with automatic emergency braking and adaptive cruise control. We're on the highway and we're driving behind this yellow vehicle. We've got our adaptive cruise control set and we're following the vehicle at 200 meters. So now what makes this possible is this radar sensor that's mounted either in the grille or behind the front bumper. And this radar sensor, through the use of radio waves, detects that vehicle in front of us by reading or interpreting the reflected radar signature. And it then interprets that signature and then determines how far away the vehicle is, how fast it's traveling, and even what angle the vehicle is in relation to our vehicle. But in order for this radar sensor to accurately detect the vehicles in front of us, it needs to be, the radar sensor that is, needs to be mounted and aligned properly, and then properly calibrated. So if you think about this, we've got a radar sensor that sends out a radio wave, and the radio wave gets sent out in a cone shape. And if everything's perfect, that radio waves get sent out straight ahead on what's called the reference angle. That reference angle is right down the center line of our vehicle, and in this instance, right down the center line of the lane in which we're driving. So that radar wave that hits that vehicle in front of us that reflects back is at a very high signal strength. If that radar sensor is not properly aligned or not properly calibrated, that reference angle may not be pointing directly straight ahead of your vehicle. So think about, we perform a service on this blue car, and we did a four-wheel alignment during which we adjusted the rear thrust angle. Now, as we all know, center line, vehicle center line is where the vehicle is pointing, and thrust angle is where the vehicle is driving. And if the thrust angle is set properly, as close to zero as humanly possible, the thrust angle and the center line should be exactly the same. But let's say that we did this alignment and we didn't get the thrust angle dialed in the way it's supposed to be, and it was just a little bit off. Well, now the center line and the thrust angle are different, and that radar sensor may not be pointing in the correct direction. Or on this vehicle with a radar sensor behind the grille, we needed to change a radiator or an AC condenser, and we had to remove the grille or the bumper cover, or we changed the headlight, which required moving the grille. And in doing so, we had to unbolt the radar sensor and bolt it back in place. Well, just that simple matter of unbolting and replacing that sensor can significantly change the direction in which it's pointing. So according to the OEMs, that sensor would need to be realigned and then calibrated. Because what this comes down to is, even with Little deviations in positioning of something like a radar sensor or a camera, especially one of these components that's a long range component, 1 degree of deviation equates to 132 inches or about 11 feet at 200 meters. So think about that. At 200 meters, we could be 11 feet off where the radar sensor is attempting to detect a vehicle. It may be looking in the wrong lane altogether and never detect the vehicle that's in front of us. And if we're talking about something serious like forward collision warning or automatic emergency braking, this little 1 degree of deviation could be the difference between an ADAS system that functions properly and prevents a collision, or a vehicle that gets into a collision because the ADAS system was unable to detect the vehicle in front of us. So these systems are very, very touchy when it comes to these forward-facing systems like windshield-mounted cameras and forward-facing radars. Other systems on the vehicle like blind spot detection, radars in the rear bumper, they actually see only a very short distance. They detect within a few yards, 10, 20, 30 yards. So if they're a little off, it doesn't make that much of a difference. They can still malfunction, and I am by no means saying that we should ever service these vehicles inaccurately. I'm just saying that when it comes to any of these mission critical forward facing systems, when we're performing regular routine services, alignment, changing tire size, changing ride height, doing suspension work, anything that requires changing a windshield, removing a grille or a front bumper, accurate alignment of the component and calibration is required. So then what do you need to get into ADAS calibration? Well, it starts with a scan tool. Doesn't matter, I happen to be showing an Autel scan tool here, but whatever your scan tool of choice is, as long as it is capable of performing ADAS calibrations, or I should say initiating ADAS calibrations, because this is an important matter here. The scan tool does not perform the calibration, the vehicle does. The scan tool can only request that the camera or the radar enter calibration mode. It's up to the camera or the radar to actually perform the calibration once we have accurately placed the target. So if you have a scan tool that doesn't have the right software, it may not be able to initiate that calibration, but a scan tool cannot incorrectly initiate a calibration, if you get my drift. So whatever brand of scan tool, aftermarket, OEM, all they do is initiate the calibration, and then it's the vehicle that takes on from there. Next, you need what's called a calibration frame. Again, here I'm showing an Autel, but a calibration frame is really just something that you're going to use to precisely hold your targets or calibration fixtures. It doesn't have to be as big and robust as what we show here. Toyota's OEM calibration frame is an 8-inch by 8-inch block of wood with a 1 meter stick of wood attached to it, on which you print your own paper target and tape it to the stick. That sounds crazy, I know, but because Toyota only does Toyotas, that works for them. Honda uses a calibration frame made of commercially available PVC pipe. Again, it works for them, just like Hyundai Kia uses a readily available camera tripod. So each OEM does it different, but aftermarket systems, regardless of the brand, aftermarket systems need to be able to adapt to a wide variety of vehicle year, make, and model, and ADAS systems. There are so many different ADAS systems available, and aftermarket systems need to have a number of targets and accessories to allow you to service the vehicles that you need to service. Which brings us to all of the different targets and patterns and accessories necessary. So again, not everyone needs to have everything. It depends on the vehicles you intend to calibrate. Depends on your business. Are you in the collision business and you're going to see more radar-based? You're in the alignment business and you need to focus on forward-facing cameras and forward-facing radars. Whereas in the glass replacement business, you may only be looking at forward-facing camera calibrations. Some shops need to do everything, and that's why we make systems that can calibrate all available systems. And then finally, you need some form of service information. You need the step-by-step calibration procedures with the specifications, the measurements, to allow you to place your calibration frame and hold the targets at the correct point, the right distance from the vehicle, the right height, and the right spacing between targets. What's nice about aftermarket systems like Autel's is all of this is built into a package. The scan tool can not only initiate calibrations, but it has illustrated step-by-step instructions to guide the user through the calibration with all the critical measurements. It basically holds their hand, helping them through the entire process, along with documenting with pre and post scan reports. So then we have to start thinking about, okay, so I want to get into calibrations, but what systems are you going to want to calibrate? Because I know it's very easy to say, I want to do everything, and that's great. There are systems available to help you do just that, but you have to be realistic sometimes. There are different targets, patterns, and accessories necessary to perform these wide variety of calibrations. I do need to let you know that there is absolutely no consistency across vehicle manufacturers when it comes to targets and radar calibration or round view monitoring calibration targets. Every OEM gets to design their own calibration fixtures and targets, and many OEMs change targets year to year or between different makes. It gets a little crazy at times. It can be overwhelming. There's a large number of forward-facing camera targets. I want to say right now there's like 25 different targets. There's 10 different radar calibration fixtures, 2 or 3 different LiDAR calibration fixtures, more than a dozen around view monitoring patterns, another 10 rear collision warning patterns. So it can, again, get pretty extensive as to the number of pieces of equipment that might be necessary to properly equip your ADAS calibration business. Again, not trying to scare you. I just want to be, open your eyes to the reality. So I just threw this together real quick. This is just forward-facing camera calibration targets that are available today. There's 23 or 25 different patterns, but if you look, there's several groups of patterns there that have the exact same shape and pattern. In fact, you look at it, they're the 6 squares of black and white checkerboards. Nissan uses 3 different sizes of that pattern on their vehicles. So they change, depending on the vehicle, what size and shape of pattern is going to be there. So it's not the aftermarket's fault that things get so crazy. We have to adapt to what the OEMs are doing. If you look at that little one on the lower right-hand corner, it's actually a little, maybe a 3-inch square with a cross in it that suction cups to the hood. This is for a Hyundai Genesis for calibrating their forward-facing camera. Some of these patterns are large. They're 2.5 feet by 3.5 feet. Some are small, 6 inches by 6 inches, and everything in between. So it does get a little nuts. Next thing you have to ask is, again, dependent on your business, do you need to perform calibrations stationary in your shop, where maybe you need to move your calibration fixture from bay to bay, but you don't necessarily have to transport it from shop to shop? So then maybe a stationary solution is in your future. Some calibration businesses need portable equipment, where a portable system that is just as at home performing calibration stationary in the service bay can also be disassembled, folded up very quickly, stuck in the trunk of a car or in the back of a van, and taken to another shop to be able to perform those same calibrations on location. If you have a mobile business, a portable system may be what you're looking for. What's important to understand is the platform, stationary versus portable, at least as far as Autel is concerned, does not change the calibrations that you can perform. Both platforms have exactly the same calibration capability. It's just a matter of how do you want to be able to calibrate. The system on the left, generally, the way it comes standard, calibrates based on the rear thrust angle. It uses wheel clamps to center and square the frame to the vehicle. The portable system uses lasers to position the calibration fixture to the vehicle center line. But the stationary system can be updated to do the same thing. So it goes back and forth. So stationary or portable, that's one question you need to answer. Next question is, do you intend, or is it important to you to be able to integrate your ADAS calibrations into your wheel alignment machine? Now, I'm not talking about just doing a calibration on an alignment lift because it is a flat level surface, but some wheel alignment manufacturers, Hunter, Chem, Rotary, Atlas, to name a few, can integrate a calibration system like Autel's into their alignment machine. So a four-wheel alignment and a forward-facing camera or forward-facing radar calibration are done together as one process. What's important to understand about this is when you're performing a forward-facing camera or radar calibration, it's critical that the front wheels are pointed dead straight ahead, that the steering angle is centered, and the steering angle sensor is set to 0 degrees, because that steering angle sensor is a major input to the camera and the radar. So it's a great option to be able to do this as part of a wheel alignment because the front wheels are already set straight ahead. So is that important to you? One question. Then we come up to probably the second most common question that I get from prospects. What are the base space requirements? Well, base space requirements, first and foremost, are dictated by the OEM. Generically speaking, a shop can do maybe 75 to 77% of ADAS calibrations in a standard 16 by 30 foot bay. Now that base space must be flat and level. Some OEMs will actually give you a specification for how level. Others, most, just say flat and level. But it really is determined by the vehicle manufacturer and the distance from the vehicle at which you need to set up your calibration targets. So here we're looking at a Volkswagen, and the calibration targets are set up within 2 meters of the front wheels of the vehicle. So if you're working on a Volkswagen, Porsche, an Audi, a Mercedes, a Toyota, a Hyundai, Kia, those position the calibration targets very close to the front of the car. But if you're working on something like a Subaru, a Nissan, a Mazda, some Hondas, the targets may have to be set at 4 meters from the front wheels. As you can see, that may exceed the base space requirement. However, if you get creative, it's a simple matter of moving the vehicle around within that flat and level bay to make it fit your shop. It's all about getting creative as long as you're not shortcutting any of the requirements, because all of the requirements provided by the OEMs or Autel or Bosch or Snap-on or anybody else are all about performing an accurate calibration. When they say flat level floor, there's a reason for it. When they say, proper lighting, there's a reason for it. And we're going to talk about that extensively in one of the upcoming sessions. Now, some shops like to perform calibrations on their alignment lift because it is a flat and level surface. If you're integrating into an alignment machine, you have to consider where your alignment lift is mounted and the type of alignment machine you have. Now, I don't mean the brand. I mean, is your alignment machine bolted to the ground or does it roll around? Because many shops have an alignment lift and the alignment machine jammed real close into a corner or up against the wall, not leaving a lot of room between the front of the vehicle and the alignment machine to be able to work. So that space between the alignment machine and the front of the vehicle is where the calibration fixture would have to be placed. So you can imagine it'd be tight quarters for the vehicles that require 2 meters or less. And it's a rare exception that a shop would have 4 meters available to be able to fit a calibration fixture in front of the vehicle while performing an alignment. But if you're not integrating into an alignment machine, You can get creative and back the vehicle onto an alignment lift, have the vehicle point out into the open shop, and simply have the calibration fixture on the other side of the lift and perform your calibrations there. Depending on the calibration system that you're looking at, it may be able to compensate for the height of your lift. Because I know not everybody has the luxury of having a flush mounted lift. Our system specifically can compensate for lifts that are actually 350 centimeters, 35 centimeters or higher above ground. Then when we look at base space requirements, we start to get into systems like around view monitoring, surround view, 360 view, bird's eye view, lots of different names. Now, surround view or around view monitoring is actually done with, the system functions with 4 cameras, one in the grille, one at the back of the vehicle, and one in each side view mirror. Some vehicle manufacturers allow you to calibrate that system 1 camera at a time. In that case, it doesn't take a lot of base space. The previous images that you saw of that Volkswagen in that 16 by 30 foot base space, you could perform an around view monitoring calibration in that bay. However, Ford, for one, has their system calibrate all 4 cameras in one step. And their patterns, their mats, are quite large, 5.5 feet wide, 37.5 feet long, and there's 2 of them. So do you have the base space requirement to be able to perform this type of calibration indoors? Could require 25 by 40 feet. Well, it's good news that Ford actually allows this calibration to take place outdoors under certain circumstances. It can't be done under direct sunlight, where the sunlight would wash out the blacks of the target, because all calibration targets are black and white. The cameras are looking for the contrast between the black and the white. And if it's a bright sunny day, that black may look gray, and then the cameras won't be able to calibrate. So out in a parking lot, as long as it's relatively flat, considering the cameras only need to see about 4 to 5 feet. If it's not perfectly level, not perfectly flat, they generally work just fine, because again, it's a very short range camera. So again, just keep that in mind for your base space requirements. Another calibration that can require a lot of space is radar calibration, depending on the vehicle manufacturer and the radar calibration fixture. There are some radar calibrations that are done within 1 meter of the vehicle. There are some, like the Toyota shown here, that when you see the calibration instructions, it gives us a diagram like this that illustrates the free and clear space required to perform this radar calibration. And here it's showing that we need 10 meters in front of the vehicle. Now, even though the calibration fixture, which is called a corner reflector, is placed at approximately 5 meters or less from the vehicle, that additional 5 meters or about 16.5 feet is intended to have no objects that could reflect a radar signal that might reflect back to the radar sensor during the calibration, thereby providing a false signal that could negatively impact the calibration. So that's why they're asking for free and clear space and why it's so important. It's not about the calibration passed, it's about doing it accurately. Because here's a really, really critical thing to understand. The scan tool, whether it's OEM or aftermarket, at the end of a calibration is going to give you a screen that says the calibration completed successfully. That doesn't mean it's accurate. The vehicle assumes that you followed all the instructions to the letter. And when it comes to radar, it's assuming that you did what it asked you to do and you didn't have any objects of metallic mass, in this case, within 10 meters of the vehicle. Well, if you didn't pay attention to that instruction and you have a toolbox or a parts washer that was within range, I have seen instances where a vehicle can calibrate off of something like an engine on a stand or a tool cart instead of the actual calibration fixture, only because the vehicle was expecting the target to be placed all by its lonesome with no extraneous objects around it, and it doesn't know that, that toolbox or that parts cart was in the way. So let's talk just a little bit more about environment. We talked about flat level floor. Now, only a few OEMs give you a specification. Ford says on the for the length of the vehicle, it must be flat and level within a ½ inch front to back. There's an aftermarket calibration company that says no more than 10 millimeters on the width of the vehicle side to side. Well, I've yet to find any OEM that allows 10 millimeters of variance in side to side level. That gets into a very, very critical measurement that can throw off the accuracy of calibrations. So it's just important to pay attention to what the OEMs are saying is allowable. Bright, even controlled lighting. Well, what does that mean? First, controlled lighting means you're not doing this outdoors for the most part, except for the few rare instances where a camera calibration like a round view on a Ford can be performed outdoors. Calibrations are intended to be performed indoors. So that's the first part of controlled lighting. The other part of controlled lighting, and I know that this doesn't necessarily fall in line the way most automotive repair shops are laid out, but because many OEMs are incredibly finicky on the amount of light that is shining on the calibration target for a camera calibration, it may be necessary to have dimmable lights or have lights that are on separate circuits. So you could turn rows of lights on and off to get just the right lighting for the particular vehicle and target combination. Little tiny changes in lighting can be the difference between a passed calibration and a failed calibration. No windows or stray lighting behind or to the sides of targets. Windows behind the target will cause light shining in the eyes of the camera and could blind it to the targets. Windows to the sides of the targets could cause uncontrolled lighting washing out the targets, causing a failed calibration. No clutter behind the targets in view of the camera. When you place a target in front of a vehicle for a camera calibration, the camera is expecting the only thing it's going to see is the target that it is expecting to see. If you've got a bunch of junk in the background that may be in a checkerboard pattern, that camera can calibrate off of something besides the target. It could calibrate successfully and still not be accurate. I was going to show you an example of this in just a moment. And as we already discussed, no objects of metallic mass when doing radar calibrations. So here's an example of a less than ideal shop environment for performing ADAS calibrations. Now, I do want to let you know that this shop belongs to a friend of mine who's an ADAS instructor, and we set this up on purpose. We were actually playing with vehicles one weekend to see how bad the conditions would have to be to fail a calibration. And this particular 2019 Honda Accord passed this calibration. Now, if you look in the background, there's a lot of things in the background that the camera could see as a checkerboard pattern or as black or white squares. We have no idea what this camera calibrated on. What we do know is before the calibration, the lane departure warning system worked flawlessly. After the calibration, it didn't. So again, the calibration may be successful, but unless you follow the instructions to the letter, there's no way of ensuring that the calibration will be accurate. Now, the fix for a situation like this, it doesn't mean that you have to move everything out of the shop. It could be as simple as placing a curtain, or the Toyota OEM method is have somebody hold a big piece of cardboard behind the targets to block out the background. Doesn't have to be fancy, it just needs to work properly. Another example here of a Toyota with windows in the background that caused a calibration to fail. The light coming through the windows blinded the camera to the target when it was in the vehicle right position. Another example of a Toyota. Notice the target is all gray. The windows behind the vehicle washed out the targets. once we covered the windows with cardboard, the target was in full view of the camera in black and white, and the calibration was successful. So with that, I know we went a little long, and I apologize for that. We can take some questions.
George, thanks for that. That was a lot of information to consume for an amateur as far as ADAS goes, like myself. But I mean, straight to the point, what is, other than the space required, what is a reasonable investment on the Autel equipment to be readily equipped for Asian and domestic, you think? I'm not a heavy Euro guy.
Okay, so Asian domestic, actually our systems come in one of two ways: forward-facing camera calibration, or basically everything. Because it's not really about Euro versus domestic versus Asian, because there's a lot of calibration fixtures, especially when it comes into night vision and radar calibration, that are shared across vehicle manufacturers, because it's more about the manufacturer of the sensor than it is the manufacturer of the car. But I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about prices, but you asked the question. It could be anywhere from $14,000 to in the $36,000 range, depending on how complete you want to be.
Okay. What's the learning curve like if I want to get a technician to be, say I got 6 guys in the shop and I want one of them to be my ADAS guy, and I want to send him to training or whatever it might be. How long is it going to take him to become proficient such that we can get work done quickly enough for it to be billing profitably?
Okay, I mean, that's a very valid question. So it actually, there's a two-part answer. First is the equipment training and becoming proficient with the equipment and actually setting up the vehicles and performing calibrations. That part is pretty simple and straightforward. And the training that we provide is typically in the 4 to 8 hour range, just as a familiarization to the equipment. And the way our software works, it really holds the technician's hand, so it walks them through the process. But it's really important to understand the ADAS systems and how they function, and how the different sensors and components function, to better understand how and why you're calibrating. So that part of training could take some time. We do have training available that gets into the ADAS systems and components in that, and we're going to be doing that in the coming months right here, just breaking it down into hour-and-a-half segments. But we have day-long, 2-day-long training sessions. There are aftermarket training providers that have intensive 3-day training sessions to learn more about ADAS functionality. But I will let you know that this is an ongoing education. As these systems change, as the OEMs fine-tune the systems and come up with new technology, that it's a continued learning curve. And then it gets into what happens when calibrations fail. That is more of a diagnostic and troubleshooting process. So not necessarily the same technician that would perform the calibration, but more of a diagnostic technician looking, and it's really no different than diagnosing any sensor or component on a vehicle today. It's component issues, connector issues, wiring issues, network issues that radars and camera sensors suffer from, just like every other component on the vehicle. So that's another type of ongoing training that would be required.
Do you know of any ADAS service centers or shops that have equipped for ADAS that have been able to make this a break-even or better prospect without being heavily involved in the body industry yet?
Okay, I'm going to ask for some clarification. When you say not heavily involved in the body industry, do you mean in collision repair or doing calibrations for the collision industry?
If I were to get into this, I mean, I imagine that there is a level of headache involved with trying to recruit business from body shops around my area, right? I feel like that's the only way I could make it break even initially, is trying to draw insurance dollars, right? Are there any ADAS equipped facilities that are making a break even ROI on the equipment with customer pay service? I guess that's a question.
It's actually a good question. I don't know that I have a specific answer for you, because almost everyone that I know is contracting other shops, or being contracted by other shops to do their calibration work. I do have one shop in North Carolina, up towards the Virginia border. He's not doing any collision business, but he is contracting with other repair shops in the area and some glass shops. So that does bring in insurance work. And he has actually been very, very profitable at it. But it's really when you get into working with the insurance companies on the collision side, or even just billing the collision shop and having the collision shop work with the insurance companies as a pass-through, that's when things become very profitable.
Okay. The guys down in Wilmington that are doing the 3-day training seminars on ADAS, are they using the Autel equipment?
Oh, they use everything. So they've got multiple, if you talk about David Friend at Mobile Tech, he's got multiple Autel systems. He has pretty much every OEM system. He's got a couple of other aftermarket systems. And when they do their training, you can pull in 6 vehicles at a time, and you go around station to station and not only try different calibrations on different vehicles, but with different equipment to see how they compare. It's a really, really nice setup. Highly recommend that training session.
Thank you, George. I really appreciate tonight. This was very helpful.
Anytime.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you everybody for sticking with us, and thank you, George. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
And
I apologize. I really thought that this was going to be 45 minutes. I forgot how much I can talk sometimes.
No worries.
Okay. I hope it was valuable.
It was, yeah. But for everybody that missed the beginning, this is part 1 of a 7-part series. So this was kind of the testing the waters to see if ADAS is right for your shop. And if you want to learn more about it, then continue showing up. We have the next one scheduled for the 30th of this month. I do believe, yes, the 30th at the same time. And that one will be, oh, I don't have the topic in front of me. Do you, George?
I don't remember if that was sensors and components or if that was ADAS systems, but it's starting to get into the more technical side.
Yeah, so that'll be our next class, and that one will be a little bit more in depth. So we look forward to that, and if you're interested, please register the same way you did for this one, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.